I'm here to join you for just 20 to 25 minutes, talking about something at PagerDuty we call the new noisy. This is effectively the phenomena we've been observing on the platform as the pandemic helped to accelerate a digital shift across really every vertical and every single business. We run a shared SaaS platform that supports close to 900,000 users, 15,000 customers, and we try to extract insights off of that. So I'll share some of that with you today. Um, as you just saw from our little promotional clip there, uptime is directly related to our revenues and money. And so today, businesses need to really center in on keeping their digital services up. And the reason for that is if you think about how businesses were operating 3 years ago, there was a definitive split in many. There were some companies that are 100% digital, obviously, but in many companies, there was a split between their digital services and their digital engagement with customers and consumers and their physical. And with the pandemic and the shift towards the digital consumption of services and the requirements we had to shut down most of our brick and mortar, you actually started seeing uptime across digital services and applications impact 95% or 100% of your business outcome, whether that was internal efficiency through delivering things like this, virtual engagement with your employees, or out to customers or selling products. So really there's this centralization around keeping our digital services up, and we've always felt this. The difference is that really more than ever, businesses are being delivered through our digital services, and more than ever, there's a high demand on them, which is straining our design. Here's an example of why that's so difficult. So this is actually a real snapshot of a contemporary application. In this case, we're looking at probably an extreme case. We're at 900, maybe 1,000 microservices. One of the things that I think is not seen on this is the actual human beings behind every one of these services. And those are innovation teams, product teams that are tasked with keeping this application up and running, keeping it dynamic, keeping it engaging for the users. And so they're actually constantly driving innovation down into those services. And you can see these blue lines actually represent dependencies between those services. So if you can imagine this is a streaming service, in order to deliver that to the customer, you're looking at thousands of these blue lines being dependent on getting that outcome to the user. It's a seriously big mess. I would argue this is something that a human can no longer figure out. Over the last couple of decades, companies have tried to maintain CMDBs or keep some kind of manual track of these services and how they're dependent. It's literally impossible now. You can see just how if you can imagine changes being pushed to every one of these little green endpoints, sometimes multiple times a day, it creates a massive problem. And it's a big data problem that machine learning can really help us sift through, especially as we want to get an idea of what's happening in real time. You really need to apply AI and machine learning to solve this problem and help us sift through it, because no human's going to do that. And I'm not going to, belabor all of the pieces in exclamation points here, but it is extremely difficult to maintain these environments, even in spite of the resiliency that we get from cloud platforms and some of the things we can automate out of the problem. There is still a real serious, challenging world for us to excel in. And I mentioned this just a second ago, but our world was built to manage queued work. And we need to be able to maintain and react to our digital services and the condition of the digital services and the humans behind it in real time. We talk about managing critical, urgent work, and generally this is unplanned work. There may be planned work that creates urgent, critical reaction that has to happen to a change in the environment or the conditions of the services. And if you rely on queued systems to do it, you're going to lose, and not just your sanity, you're going to lose millions of dollars at your company, because by the time you've taken the time to fill out a ticket and submit a work request, and the linear sequential process for identifying who should get that work done, all of that takes many minutes, if not hours. And when that happens, you're losing. So we focus on being able to react in real time, being able to urgently get in touch with people, or potentially leveraging automation without a human being involved to try and solve it even before you need to interrupt somebody who would rather be coding. So we want to keep them always online. We want to, when something isn't going wrong, we want to get just the right person. I actually spoke with a customer a couple of weeks ago. When they had a challenge with one of their services, they obviously called everybody into a war room. The problem lasted 3 days. By the end of the third day, they had 425 individuals in this troubleshooting session. Only 2 developers at the company were actually needed to solve the problem, but they didn't know who they were, and they couldn't map the human dependency to the technical dependencies, and it hurt them big time. So we need to be able to understand ultimately when our systems are up, when we're responsible for something that's not optimal inside of that dependency, who specifically is responsible for each one of those, when are they available, what's the best and fastest way to get their attention, what can we do before we get their attention. And then at PagerDuty, we're totally focused on helping to kind of predict when issues are starting and helping to resolve them super rapidly because there's just not enough time in the day. And I'll give you some data on that in a second, because we just released a study that we pulled from our entire platform that actually talked about a 20% increase in critical incidents, which means 20% increase in interruptions in all of your lives. And I actually had some data here on this last slide. 12 extra weeks of year. Every single year, basically, these increase in critical incidents spell out hours of extra work every single day or week, and at the end of the year, you've spent 12 extra weeks troubleshooting. And I don't think anybody on this call wants to donate 12 more weeks of their time to their jobs. So we really do have to solve this problem. I mentioned a bit about change. I think we all want to be able to support dynamic, rapid innovation and change on these products. The counter to that, however, is 70 to 80%. Most everyone agrees 70 to 80% or higher of all the incidents that are occurring everywhere across all of your systems and your infrastructure and your applications and your microservices. Change is generally the root cause 70% or more of the time. So you have to be able to become a master at supporting constant change and innovation, but you also have to, in our case, leverage machine learning to help identify very, very rapidly which changes could potentially have been the root cause of an outage or a degradation in a service. The other is managing the noise. So when the pandemic started, we released some data off of our platform as basically the world shifted to ordering groceries online and buying clothing online and getting healthcare online and managing insurance and financial and et cetera all online. The noise level went massively up, and the result of that was just tons of false alarms and interruptions. We saw a 48% increase in incidents with the pandemic shift year over year. And so what we did was we actually tuned our machine learning to do more effective noise reduction and to squelch alarms that were going off, or potentially consolidate alarms instead of reacting to 15 fire alarms, really only seeing it as my house is on fire. I use an example here with the connected home. Actually, I installed a doorbell, a video doorbell, and immediately the motion sensor alarm was going off constantly. And so that lasted about 3 hours, right? I was like, these are tons of false alarms. The wind blows, my tree shakes, and this thing's going off. So I squelched that alarm. But, I kind of want the information from my doorbell when I have a fire alarm and a flood alarm or a burglary, security alarm system going off. Those are times that I want that context. So what it's important to leverage machine learning to correlate across different sets of signals, because if you can see 5 things happening at the same time, or across dependent services, for example, you know something's actually wrong, and as opposed to just reacting to a motion sensor, for example. Taking the right action is a big deal. We all use things like run books, and we use things like postmortems to identify how we're solving common issues. But really, you want to remove the toil of solving those issues that are repetitive out of your life. And so this is a place automation can play a big role, but you really have to think about how to start to adopt automation in your lives. This being a terrifically contemporary developer audience, I'm sure you're all leveraging automation in different ways in getting your job done. And there's a lot of siloed automation technologies out there. When you're deploying your code into production, asking other people to take responsibility potentially, or asking to not be interrupted so you can keep coding, you want to give a tool set to those first responders so that they can also take authenticated, low risk, secure action across your infrastructure and across your services. And so this is a place that automation can have a huge impact. And then I've already mentioned this a couple of times, but you really want to leverage data, because today there is so much data and it's so hard to sift through it. The other thing is not many tools or platforms on the market focus on your team's health and how your team is being taxed by the technical load of supporting systems. We're obviously in the middle of the great resignation, and we actually were able to correlate on our platform as developers were interrupted more and more, and as they were asked to take more and more off-hour time and weekend time to solve challenges with their services, they actually left companies. And because we have such loyal, amazing customers, when they move to the next company, they join back on the platform, and we can actually see that this stress that the pandemic and that all this new capacity and intensity is driving is having a human impact on all of us. And it's important to map that up. It's not just data to make your application run faster or to get customers to their aha moment faster. It's also data to keep your team together and keep your amazing developers at your company, which is likely more critical. About 5 years ago, we started talking about operational maturity. We released something called the Digital Operations Maturity Model, and we've since updated it. And I think it's a helpful tool. We've vetted this across like tens and tens of industry analysts and probably hundreds of customers, and we keep this updated. But we use it as a guide, and I think it's absolutely yours to use. If you like this, you can get in touch. And I have maturity models for each of the technical areas that we focus on at PagerDuty, being, incident response, AI ops, automation, customer service operations. Each one of those has their own arc of realizing that you got to do it well, starting to react and trying to do it well, then actually getting decent at reacting and becoming relatively responsive when things go wrong, and then moving into proactive and preventative. And those are areas, again, where machine learning, automation, and some event intelligence can go a long way. So feel free to leverage this later. I'll release these slides after the event, and do reach out, because I love talking about this stuff. So I mentioned change, and you really need to be able to understand change across massively complex systems. Here's where I do toss a couple of product images in, but this is what's called the PagerDuty service graph, and it's dynamic, and you can immediately see when, for example, a business service is being degraded or impacted, the sets of dependent services that are impacting that, and then rapidly find where the root cause is or determine the blast radius of an impact. And again, here's something that needs to be done: is you're not just managing your microservice. You have to really understand how your sets of microservices and capabilities are actually rolled up into a business service and a business outcome. and it's important to be able to do that not only for yourselves, but for your stakeholders and for your customer service teams so that they know exactly what the state is of these critical business services at any given time. And again, here, this is something where we can push back information from this machine learning generated technology back into things like your CMDB or your ticketing system, for example. We generally preach, don't try to take a queued system and create a real-time system out of it. Use the real-time system to inform your queued systems. And this is not necessarily about a rip and replace. This is about a enhance and kind of and integrate. I mentioned machine learning to reduce noise, and there's major impacts there. I also mentioned during the pandemic that the noise level went up about 48%. We tweaked our machine learning. We got back about 60% noise reduction. So do not underestimate how many false alarms or how many alarm storms you're having in your environment. And that is seriously fatiguing, and it can lead to ignoring the signal through that noise, kind of a boy or girl who cried wolf type of situation, where you need to identify when something's really wrong, and if you stop paying attention because it's just too noisy, it's defeating the purpose. And so we use things like suppression and deduplication. You can create event routing rules and event management rules. We can do that by service or by business service. The other thing you can do is read into the metadata of the events and incidents coming into the system, and do different intelligent sorting and control over that by specific fields in the header, for example. And then there's this side when something's definitely going wrong, and then you do need to get to troubleshooting, potentially mobilizing humans and solving the problem. And that's a different side of that problem, which is taking the right action. And we acquired a company called Rundeck. They have an open source offering, by the way, if you just want to kind of get started. Rundeck is a runbook automation solution. So what that means is it's about IT operations and product service operations automation. The reason I love Rundeck personally is they are a wrapper automation technology that can integrate with Ansible, can integrate with, maybe even RPA solutions you have in your environment, integrate with your scripting intelligence that you've already built, integrate with the automation in a native cloud provider. And they do it. The reason we acquired them is they did it in a way that was about presenting it to human beings to leverage it. So once again, the kind of interaction of technology and managing technical services, but also doing it in a way that makes a human being's life easier, is kind of where PagerDuty's focused. And so in this case, they enable secure, highly authenticated, easy to manage and maintain runbook automation, and they can present that automation to a first tier troubleshooter or even a customer service rep. I don't have time to tell the story, but think of when you call your internet provider, when your broadband is down. They run a script with you that's the most annoying script in the world, especially for a technical audience. I think you understand this, but when they ask you to reboot your modem again, you want to tear your hair out. But if they had a set of automation at their hands, they could actually automate a lot of that troubleshooting with us, and it makes the user's experience so much more dynamic. And it feels like the company is more advanced and delivering a higher value product because the first person you contacted really has a lot of control over solving the problem. And that's the idea of kind of democratizing automation. So we all have automation, and as specialists, we can write automation and we can run our automation. But this is about giving that control out to, basically your entire technical team in a way that's not putting you at risk. I mentioned this, but we released something called the State of Digital Operations Report. We pulled a whole bunch of data from our platform and pulled back some really interesting information, but you can see that about 20% growth in critical incidents over the last year. That had that impact of interrupting everybody multiple hours more a day, which had that roll-up impact of 12 weeks every year. The noise reduction that we're seeing across the platform, again, very impressive. If you consider the amount of noise coming in, we're able to really squelch a lot of it. And people have less consistent working hours, so they're working overnight, they're working over weekends, and it's causing burnout. And again, we found a significant statistical relation between the companies that were having these critical incidents and not able to manage them effectively, and people just leaving the company. So either fix this at your environment or expect to have high churn. So really, I talked a lot about managing the ingest and understanding of events. Really, where the biggest gains are coming now is on that second half of the problem. So how do we triage? How do we find the root cause of the problem, or at least the likely root cause? How do we potentially automatically back that cause out? And if we aren't doing it automatically, how do we rapidly find the exact right person at the organization so that they can fix it for us quickly? So wrapping up, I'm assuming everybody's feeling the pressure because everywhere I go, I see customers living in a new environment where their resources have stayed relatively the same. Teams aren't growing very much, but the challenge has gotten harder